on to the last section of the review. We went through Transcontinental Railroad, new industries, and immigration in the last video. So now we're on to section 4, or lesson 4. 3 major problems with cities growing so much. One was poverty, filth and garbage, which led to disease. You could put disease here, but it doesn't flow through the flow chart quite as well. And then fires. Here you could potentially put disease, but again, it's going to have to have an answer for how it was addressed. So fires fits the best here. And there are more regulations or more requirements of the government than with buildings for what they looked like. Fire escapes, sprinkler systems, things like that. Problem with filth and garbage, General George Waring. Okay, so we can remember that this is a general, and if you can remember that he had a fight against garbage and filth, and his last name starts with War. This is General War fighting garbage. Easy to remember, right? General Waring. And then he also had his crew of white ducks or white wings, the people who dressed up in all white, and they went and swept the streets of sewage. And they didn't have they didn't have cars, they just had horses. So they had, of course, lots of waste from the horses, and they cleaned that up. They didn't have a good sewer system. They didn't have good clean water. Lots of problems. So General Waring cleaned up the streets, and that kind of set an example for the rest of the country of what needed to be done. He was in New York City. Last problem, going right to left, is poverty. Just an awful lot of poor individuals. And so Jacob Riis had a passion for this, and he went around and photographed people. So he used flash photography so he could get night pictures of all these people crammed into these tiny little tenements. And he would hold meetings where he would invite the wealthier people and he would show pictures to them. He also wrote a book called something along the lines of How the Other Half Lives, and sold that. It was a bestseller. So he exposed poverty, and then people kind of took notice. And one of the things that they ended up doing was create things like settlement houses. And so what were the primary objectives of settlement houses? So since we went right to left instead of left to right, it leads right into this next question. A settlement house was a place where they got medical help, food, and new skills. So we talked about sometimes they would get caught in this cycle where they were poor, and then their kids had to work instead of go to school, and their kids would end up being poor, and then their kids would have to work. So instead, this taught new skills to those people to try to help them get out of this cycle of poverty. Specific settlement house was the whole house mentioned, specifically in Chicago, and then they spread out from there. But they would teach kindergarten and then improve the conditions of the tenements and the factories for those poorer people. Another way that they fought back against poverty was they formed unions. So we talked about the extremely wealthy people, Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller with oil companies. The bosses really didn't have any checks and balances to make sure that they were being fair. And so the employees grouped together and they would form labor unions. And those labor unions would fight for, specifically, better pay, shorter work hours. A lot of times they wanted to try to get insurance in case they got injured on the job. But anytime there was an issue, they would try to address it as a group. And they would use collective bargaining, which means collective is as a group, and bargaining, if your mom goes shopping for a bargain, she's looking for a deal. So as a group, they are doing a deal. If they didn't get what they want, they would go on strike and refuse to work until their needs were met. There's also the American Federation of Labor. This is just a specific union. They had shorter work weeks, better pay, and insurance if workers got injured on the job. Those are the 3 main things that they demanded. This is called workman's comp now. And so basically, if I break my leg playing flag football like I did a couple of years ago, if it happens on the job, workman's comp will almost always pay for that. One thing that we had also talked about, going back up to the labor unions, there's kind of a good and a bad side to this. And depending on when it took place and the extent of the labor union. So the good thing is it stands up for the little guy, right? Gives them a voice, and it helps the higher ups to have to listen to the poorest and the lowest. So that's kind of the good side to it. The bad side is it guarantees people a position even if they're terrible at their job. It makes it so it's about impossible to get fired because the labor union has lawyers and they will try to sue the company to make sure people don't lose their jobs, which sounds good unless somebody's like, meh, I'm just going to sit here and not do my job because the labor union is going to fight for me. And so it also makes it a lot harder on businesses. And then also, if you pay your employees more, where are you going to get the money as a boss? And so you have to jack up your prices, and it just kind of cycles through. And does it really help the little guy, or does it just drive inflation? So there's some roundabout conversations. We watched a short video on that, but overall, going back over 100 years, the labor unions, they kind of just wanted to stand up for the little guy because at the time they're getting pretty rough treatment. So that's pretty much the entire review. There will be more, though. Knowing some inventions and inventors could help. And then there's one last section we're going to go over with this video, if I can find it, the bulletin board pictures. So there will be some pictures on the test, and you'll be asked to tell